Okay, get out of your head with Brian Sachetta. Today, we have a guest with us who his passion for helping folks overcome mental illness is something that he just strives to pour over individuals daily through all of his passions. He has a new book coming out. He's going to walk us through a 10-step process of how to get out of our own heads. Man, we need you. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
Thanks for being here. You do mention you have a strong passion, you have a background, a history. Maybe we could start there and kind of walk us through where this passion started.
Yeah, sure. So I dealt with anxiety in high school, didn't really know what it was. I don't come from a clinical background. My parents aren't doctors or anything like that. So I just didn't really know what I was dealing with. I would kind of call it nervousness. And then as I got to college, it was the first weekend of college. I had met this girl early on that I kind of liked and, seemed like we had something going. And one night she texted me and she was like, hey, I'm going to come over. She's being kind of forceful with her texts. And I can tell she's kind of drunk and I'm not. And I'm like, this is such an awkward situation. I like this girl. I don't know how to handle myself. I don't know what to do with this. I had a panic attack in front of a different woman that I had been dating previously. And that experience really stuck with me, but I didn't have the terminology to describe that at the time. And I didn't have the terminology to describe this one or what I was going through at the moment as it happened either. But so this woman comes over, I have a panic attack in front of her. She sits down next to me and my heart is racing and I'm super, super nervous. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And like, she's drunk and like, she feels my heart racing and she can tell that I'm super nervous. And she just gets up and she starts swearing at me and a lot of F words and things of that nature. She's 18 and I'm 18 and I'm trying my best to like calm myself down, but I'm also really, really freaking out. And she runs down the hallway and she's like, never talk to me again, yada, yada, yada. And so, as you can probably imagine, like as an 18-year-old, there's a pretty like tough experience to go through, right? It was like the next day I woke up and I was like, oh my goodness, that was really, really difficult and painful. And I don't totally know what it was, but I don't want to experience that sort of thing ever again. So I'm sitting at my desk, one of the first Saturdays of college, and I'm like, I got to figure out what that was. Like, I say I'm nervous sometimes. I know my heart was racing. So I'm on Google, like searching all these different terms, trying to make sense of my experience. And so that kind of marked the beginning of my journey. Okay, I understand that this is something absolutely going to deal with in my life. And until I really sit down, dedicate myself to it, it could be a long time before I figured this out. And in some ways, it was ironic in the sense that that was the entry point into the journey. And it wasn't until 10 years later and going through a lot of different other experiences and reading a lot of different books and studies, familiarizing myself with all the common language around anxiety and mental health and whatnot, that I finally published my first book. And so that's Get Out of Your Head, Volume 1, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety. That was the entry point. And from there, I always tell those stories and I always go back to them because I say to myself, like, I see myself as that 18-year-old kid who was beside myself. And I see that person in other people. And I say to myself, I want to help folks avoid those situations, avoid that pain. I wrote the book hoping to condense the 10-year journey that I went on into something smaller that folks can then grab the book and say, hey, these are all this person's experiences. This is what he has learned. And this is how I can apply it to my own battles. Hopefully mitigate some of the things that I go through much quicker than, over the course of 10 years.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing out of you. It's less about avoiding it altogether and more about expediting the journey because 10 years is rough, right? And you were young. For you to even be able at that point to really pinpoint it and say something has to change or else this is going to affect my whole life is wise. It could have been the 10 years later before you're like, enough, and now I need to start on this. So the other thing you mentioned, it's a toolkit. Can you kind of walk us through how your book is set up, your previous book, and then you have a volume 2 coming out? Tell us all about both.
Yeah, definitely. So I say it's a toolkit in the sense that no one solution is going to work perfectly for every individual person, right? So in some ways, what I'm doing is I'm throwing a lot of different ideas at the reader. And I'm saying, hey, here are all these different tools that you could potentially put into your tool belt or your toolkit, right? And you could say, all right, he threw 20 at me. These 5 resonate with me the most. I know that I'm going to write them down. I'm going to remember them. And then that way, the next time I find myself in a situation where I'm anxious or I'm going into a situation that's going to make me nervous, I can pull those tools out. I can leverage them, that sort of thing. I think it's important, again, to just stress the fact that different tools work better for different people. And so going along that theme, here are all the things that have helped me. As the reader, you kind of have to synthesize the information and see what resonates with you the strongest, right? And then when it comes to the content of the book itself, there are two parts of the book. So the first part I just call zooming in. So it's kind of like looking at acutely anxious situations, one in which we are like fearful in the moment. And I present a lot of different strategies, but specifically this 10-part framework called the 10 steps to getting out of your head. And those are 10 specific strategies that we can use when we are in the moment of fear, right? So if I am having a panic attack right now, if I'm feeling very anxious right now, I can use any of those 10 steps to help walk that fear back a little bit. In the book, I kind of use them almost sequentially, as in like, hey, do step 1, then step 2, that sort of thing. There's sort of an art form to like the narrative of writing a book, right? So take the information as you will, synthesize it as you will, take whichever steps in that process make the most sense to you. But those are the steps that I use personally to help get myself out of my head in those scary situations. The second part of the book I call zooming out. It's more of, okay, looking at our lives as a whole, how do we get into fewer of those fearful or anxious situations in the first place, right? So like maybe we decide that we need to take up a meditation practice, and that allows us to be a little bit less on edge overall, which allows us to then, stop some of the anxious thinking patterns before they begin.
Oh, this is so good. I love, Brian, the zooming in, zooming out. Like the reality is these moments will happen. So how do I get myself back out of this moment? And then I think it's your second part, the zooming out, that people forget to say, hey, why is this going on in the first place? Like, what do I keep putting myself into? That's awesome. Can you give us a couple quick examples? You don't have to go through all 10, but give us a couple that just really help you. And I know, again, it's a process, but
yeah, sure. I have a couple that I go to all the time on podcasts, but I do like to switch it up a little bit. The one that I will not switch it up on is step 1, which is to breathe. It's the most basic one that we have. Sometimes it comes off as hilariously obvious in the sense of, yeah, I know I need to breathe, right? Like I'm nervous. Like, I get it, right? But the reason why I thought this was such an important step is, number one, like it's always with us. We can always say to ourselves, even if we forget some complicated strategy or mantra or whatever it is, we always have our breath with us. We are always breathing, like if we are alive, or hopefully we're always breathing, right? And so even though we still need an awareness to say to ourselves, I am now anxious and I need to do some breath work or, do some deep breathing in the moment, it's just a really effective strategy that we can pull out of our toolkit any moment of the day. And that's why I love it. So I go into the science a little bit. And it's still like, kind of rudimentary science, but it's still talking a little bit more about the strategy and make it so that way folks don't just say, yeah, dude, like I get it, like breathe, you know what I mean? So when we talk about that science, so we have our autonomic nervous system, which is part of our nervous system that just operates on its own. There are multiple breakdowns of the autonomic nervous system, but the first one, or the one that we think about most, is the fight or flight system. So that's the sympathetic nervous system. So when we're in a dangerous situation, our body revs that system up automatically. A part of that nervous system, or a feature of it, is basically when that starts revving up, our body is sending blood and stress hormones to our extremities, trying to allow us the ability to get out of the situation that we're in as quickly as we possibly can, right? And so related to that is the fact that when all this blood is rushing to our extremities, our body basically makes it so that we're like, okay, rather than like deep breathing and like, calmly being where we are, our breath becomes really shallow and really quick because we're trying to get out of whatever it is that's in front of us, like really quickly. And so it's funny because that is part of that nervous system, or that division of the nervous system in and of itself. But also, if we breathe shallowly and quickly, we can activate the sympathetic nervous system on its own. And then so on the other side of, if we're talking about these two divisions, right? So sympathetic nervous system, and then the second one is the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the rest and digest, or feed and breathe system. So basically, like if you find yourself relaxed, if you're calm, that part of your autonomic nervous system is probably activated, right? And so just as the specific type of breathing is both innate to that division of the nervous system, as well, in addition to something that we can do to activate it. When we breathe deeply, we activate this parasympathetic nervous system, the part of our ANS that basically says, hey, I'm okay. Stop the stress hormones, stop the blood from like rushing to our extremities, calm the body down. We're safe. It's okay. Going into this science is basically a reminder to say, like, if we find ourselves in these fearful situations, it's more likely than not that, one, our sympathetic nervous system is activated, and two, we are breathing shallowly. If we want to get ourselves out of that state, then what we need to do is we need to take some long, deep breaths, to be technical, I guess, the parasympathetic nervous system activates when we breathe out. And so obviously, if we're not breathing in very deeply, we can't breathe out deeply either. So what we want to do is we just want to, grab that awareness and say to ourselves, I'm feeling fearful right now. I need to activate my parasympathetic nervous system. I'm going to do that by taking some long, deep breaths. And even though, again, it sounds kind of obvious, like a little bit of that science can sometimes be helpful to say, like, there's a method to this madness, or there's a method to this simplicity. And that's what's going to help you, move out of that fearful state that you're in.
Right. So I hope this comes across right that I'm about to say this, because I love what you're saying. It's not the first time, if my listeners are longtime listeners, it's not the first time they're hearing it. And the reason why I love this even more is because sometimes we need to keep hearing that same message, because I guarantee you the first time they heard it, like breathe, yeah, breathe, yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, I'm hearing this again. And am I doing it right? How many times does it all of a sudden we're in the right moment of the right day and we're like, got it. Okay. This has to be a tool in my tool belt. I am missing this really great component that's so accessible. So thank you. You explained it beautifully. Thank you for going there. That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny sometimes, different ideas, it takes those extra repetitions for them to resonate. And just one last thing to tie up this point, right? It's like when we are anxious, we are in our heads, we are thinking too much. If we want to apply the additional steps in this framework, the 10 steps, right? We need to be able to get back to a place of like logic and reasoning, or at least the ability to think. When we are really, really fearful, we don't have any time to think. Our nervous systems are like, dude, if that thing, whatever is in front of you, if that thing attacks you, you are in big, big trouble. So get out of here as quickly as possible, right? So it's like when we step back, when we breathe, we can see things in a little bit different of a light. We can get back to some of our cognitive capacities and say to ourselves, like, okay, I understand where I am. I need to apply the rest of the steps. That's going to help me, walk myself out of my head even further, evade some more of those stressful feelings.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So what brought on book 2? What did you feel like maybe didn't get left out, but just felt like the natural progression to keep going?
Yeah. So book 2 is actually pretty different. So book 2 is on depression, and I write from my experiences. So from 2008 to 2018, I had learned a lot of things on the anxiety front. I'll talk about this story in the second book in more detail, and readers can pick that up and get the entire download. But essentially what happened was, like, I was about to release book 1. Now I figured this anxiety thing out. I am ready to share my insights with the world. I don't necessarily want to go into all the details on the podcast, but for better or for worse, right? I found myself in a depressive state as soon as I went to release that book. And it was this really I don't even know how to describe it. It was this almost like shocking experience where I said to myself, like, I thought I had this whole thing figured out. And yet here I am, like, I'm completely miserable. I am about to release this book. Like, am I a total fraud? I have no idea what is going on. Right. And so I released the book anyway, and I'm, that was a long-term dream of mine. Like, that was something that I really wanted to do. I'm very proud that I did that. The book continues to help folks all across the world and the country. And I'm like very grateful for that, because that's something that, I want to give back. I want to help my readers and my listeners, but I also was undergoing this new journey. I had faced depression in the past when I was in college, but I didn't expect it to ever come back in this capacity. I would say maybe like 6 months into that depressive episode, it was like, okay, if I figure this out, or if I get out of it, I am going to write another book. I didn't plan on it, but it's going to happen. And so, over the last 3 years, that's kind of been the journey into that. This book is a little bit more technical in the sense of, like, I've done a lot more research. I've added a lot more frameworks from psychology and psychiatry. There's a lot more studies that I reference. There are some personal stories, but like not as many as the first book. I think this one, I don't know. It's always hard to say, right? You never know how somebody's going to receive a book like an audience will. But I do think this book is a little bit more, I guess I would say, mature or something like that, right? In the sense that the first book, I was a little off the cuff, 28, a little bit more rebellious or something like that. And so this one is a little bit more solemn. It's more serious. I think the hardest thing that I'm trying to do is strike a balance between help readers navigate the journey that they're going through, this like very, very difficult and painful journey. And at the same time, be there with them, right? Not talk down to them, not say to them, hey, you'll get through it or whatever. Just be like, hey, I'm here for you. If you need to hold my hand, if you need to come along with me, we're going to figure this out. That's the balance that I'm trying to achieve in this book. And I think I'm getting there, but until I release it, I won't know for sure. But I hope to, again, help some folks with this book. I think, depression is such a serious and heavy subject. And I think one of the main reasons why I wanted to release the book or write the book, which is kind of the same thing as the first one, was like, we don't talk about mental health in our society enough. And I think a lot of folks struggle with it. And even though it sounds kind of small or insignificant, like for one person, whether it's me, whether it's you, whether it's someone else, to come out and say like, hey, hand up, I struggle with this too. These are some of the things that I have, walked through, or these are some of the things that have helped me. I think that really does go a long way in helping people to be able to, number one, be more open and honest themselves, both with their struggles and to others. And also, like, the more ideas that are out there, the more conversations that are happening, the more help that is kind of finding folks all over the world. So that was my process. And that was kind of the reasoning behind the book. So that's the high level stuff. If you want to jump into more details, I'm happy to do that as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Through podcasting, which is cool, I feel like you can hear more people with stories, and the stories are beautiful, and understanding, like, because somebody could look at you and go, that guy does not have any problem with depression or anxiety. Like, cool, fun dude, able to get on a podcast live, visual, audio. So it's just, I think, to that other person to say, oh, you kind of look like me. You kind of, maybe your life aligns with mine. I can see you having a community within your books. Do you do anything like that via Facebook or any other app where your readers can all engage with each other?
Yeah, I haven't actively fostered it yet or created anything. I don't know, like, the liability. I just haven't thought that through yet. For now, when folks reach out to me, I make sure to get back to them fairly quickly, right? And just say like, hey, I'm here, I'm listening. If you want to share your story with me, I will absolutely listen. I'll give you the advice that I can. That's been great. Just hearing these stories from folks who are overcoming different things. It is those stories that I hear from folks that keep me going, that keep me in the game, that keep me interested in doing what I'm doing, right? It's all about the feelings and the ability to give back and help folks.
Right. We all say, if I can help one person, and it really is that. It's like, if one person can benefit off of this, and in your case, save a life, because it is that for some people. It's like they could pick up your book in that moment where they don't feel like it's worth living anymore. And all of a sudden it gives them that one glimpse of, maybe I could get there too. Maybe I could be where he is. So it's awesome. You had mentioned, as you're on a health and fitness podcast, you mentioned, I see mental well-being as one of the foundational elements of an overall healthy lifestyle. And I 100% agree with you, but go into your perspective on that.
Yeah. So what I was kind of getting at with that, it's one of the things I touch upon in probably the last or the second to last page of the first book, which is basically like, your mind is always with you, right? So it's like, you could get a new car, you could get a new job, you could move to a new city, you could go on a paradise vacation. But if your mind isn't in the right place, none of those things are going to change how you feel. None of those things are going to improve your life, make you feel, amazing, or at least in the long term, right? You might go on this vacation and be like, I feel great today, but then I go home tomorrow and I'm back in the same place that I was, right? So when it comes to health and fitness, it's like, you could run a marathon, you could be, muscular, in shape. I don't know whatever else goes along with those sorts of things, healthy, vibrant. But if your mind is still telling you that you're worthless, that none of the things that you do matter, right? Like, it's almost as if you don't have that foundation that's going to allow you to then go on and press forward in your life. And so it's almost like, even though those things are very important, and, as I talk about in the second book, exercise is actually a proven way to help combat depression. Mm-hmm. Without those things, without the foundation of feeling like, you are worth something, like you can get through your day with some peace and clarity and be able to avoid anxiety and depression. Without those things, it's hard to make strides in the physical realm. It's almost like, if you're too depressed to get out of bed, it's going to be really hard to go for a walk. It's going to be very hard to exercise, to go up to the next rung on the ladder and improve some of the other pieces of your life. So I look at it as like, I do think health and fitness is also one of those foundational pieces, in the sense that, if you are, if you're like, hey, I want to go get this new job, I want to start a podcast, whatever it is, it's like, if you're constantly stressed out or not in peak physical ability, or I don't want to say too many things. I don't want to offend anybody on this podcast.
No, that's all just real. Go.
Yeah. It's, I guess, lack of a better way of saying it. If you have a really stressful job, but you love that job, I'm overweight, I'm out of shape. My heart is not like my physical heart. Like if your doctor is like, dude, you got to slow down. Otherwise, like, you're going to be in some serious trouble here. If you don't have that foundational element of, I am healthy, I am at a healthy weight, I have some sort of cardiovascular capacity, the ability to take on stress, the ability to take on different things in my life. It's going to be very hard to sustain whatever it is we're trying to do, right? It's like, a year down the road when we have tons of meetings and we're not sleeping as well as we probably could have, it's very possible that we experience burnout, despair, a panic attack, something like that. And so I see mental health, I see physical health as two of those foundational elements where it's like, without those things, I mean, it's very hard to build on top of the pyramid. It's very hard to sustain anything that you're trying to do.
You're right. Absolutely. And it kind of brings me back to that feeling of sometimes we have to go through these journeys a little slower so that we're learning in the process so that we can steward that bigger result down the road. And for even your personal journey or somebody in a weight loss journey, if you don't learn along the way, then the maintenance doesn't happen down the road, where we got to get the mental health piece right, because you could be ticking along, and all of a sudden a bout of depression comes or something comes. And if we weren't dealing with the emotional component, now there's that fall off and get back on again versus just a nice steady. Can we dig personally into your journey for a second? For instance, sure. I love that you mentioned exercise. Really, it is a prescription for depression, for when you were in a state of feeling that way and somebody saying, hey, you need to go exercise. Like, what were some of your ways to get yourself out the door, to get the shoes on?
To talk about my battle itself, like it's, there's a bunch of different kinds of depression. So for example, there's like major depressive disorder, right? So that's like, you feel really, really lousy for like a minimum of 2 weeks, possibly 6 months, something like that. The thing that I deal with is dysthymia, which is basically like low grade depression for, at least a year, possibly 2 years. And so I talk to my doctors about it. They're like, I don't want to put this in the wrong way, but like, you're kind of good in the sense that you're a highly functional depressive. Like you keep doing things. It's more just like, is there a point at which like whatever it is that's in your mind, does that ever, break the camel's back and prevent you from then keeping up with your routines and whatnot? And so for me, I find that linking to what I just said, it's like the routines are what keep me going. Like if I'm on vacation and it's like, hey, we're sitting around the pool for 7 days in a row, mm-hmm. I don't know what to do with myself. It's like, even though I complain sometimes, like almost jokingly, right? It's like, I'm trying to get this book done. I'm trying to finish this blog. I've got a busy schedule, whatever it is. It's like, even though I may complain about those things, those are also the things that keep me going. When I'm like, in a cabin in the woods with like 5 friends, as much as I love my friends, it's like, by the 4th day, it's like, oh dude, like I got to get up, I got to exercise, I got to read a book, I got to keep my mind from going to those dark places. Right. For me, the exercise component, it's never been difficult. I know that without my exercise, I am, for lack of a better word, I am screwed. And so it's always been like, I know in the same sense that like some folks may say like, I have to take my meds every day. I have to take my meds every day. Like that's keeping me on track. My exercise is the same thing. It's almost like the clouds start coming over your mind, like slowly, and you almost don't even realize it. And then all of a sudden it's like, I'm in that dark place. I got to get out the door. I got to go for a run. I got to go lift weights, whatever it is, right? Even if I just go for a walk, like I got to go do it. And so that's been something that's been really helpful for me. And then, along the journey of writing this second book, being able to say to myself, like, hey, I'm looking into the research. I'm validating some of the things that I've found through my real life experiences, through research and through studies, and saying like, hey, it's not just a coincidence that like, you really grew attached to exercise. Like that's what the research says, right? So that's been helpful for me.
Yeah. You'll be a good resource for this as well. This goes along with getting out of your head. The whole idea of having to feel like going out or like getting joy from getting that exercise, I think you're already kind of nailing it down. It ultimately helps you, whether or not that day you probably feel like doing it or whether you even get that like exercise high after it. Can you kind of take us through that too? Have you had to overcome that? And it can be in fitness. It could just be in food choices. It could be anywhere in the health realm where like you can't wait on the I feel like it to get moving on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny when I have these conversations because we always touch upon like specific things that are like key elements in book 2. There's this idea that I'm going to talk about in the second book, which I call the perception cycle, which is basically you find yourself in a specific state. That state determines how you think. That how you think determines how you feel. How you feel determines how you act. How you act determines your results. And then the cycle starts all the way over again, right? Mm-hmm. So like when it comes to depression, it's basically like we start off and we are depressed. because of that, we tell ourselves certain stories about the world, right? So we say, the world is an evil and terrible place. I'm never going to achieve my dreams, whatever stories we concoct in our minds, right? Those stories then lead us to feel pretty lousy. And then they influence our actions most normally when it comes to depression, like in a either like negative or non-existent fashion, in the sense that like, rather than saying, hey, I feel great and I can achieve all my goals, I'm going to go take action on them. We say, like, kind of going back to the things that I just mentioned, like, I'm hopeless, I'm helpless, nothing's going to change. We say to ourselves, even subconsciously, it's like, well, I guess I'm just going to sit on the couch. I'm going to continue to scroll through my phone. I might do nothing at all. I might think over some terrible ideas. I might just turn on Netflix and crush some sort of marathon, like a whole season of something. And so then on the other side of that action, we then realize that our states and where we are in the world hasn't changed all that much, right? So then we come back to the beginning of the cycle and we basically say, I'm still in this depressed state. And I've been going through this cyclical pattern for a while. Why would I think that anything is going to change? The whole conclusion behind it in the book is saying, even though we may think that the state that we're in or how we're feeling is the most important part or the starting point of this cycle, there's actually, you can enter at any point. So even though we may say to ourselves, I need to wait until I feel less depressed before I can then go for a job interview, right? That is some sort of like a disempowering story in our minds that isn't true, right? So even though it could be really difficult, we could say, hey, I'm depressed, but I'm going to go to that job interview anyway. Even if it doesn't work out well, I'm going to keep, the hope alive in my mind. I'm going to tell myself empowering stories that basically say, that one didn't go well, but that doesn't mean that the rest of them won't go well, right? And so long story short, or like long way of basically giving some of the background behind the question that you asked, I don't feel like I have personally, I don't have an issue with the like saying to myself, I'm in the wrong state. I'm not going to try to do something until I feel better. For me, it's kind of just more like getting through those feelings in general. They're painful, right? And it's like, I feel depressed. Those depressive thoughts bring on stories in my mind that, again, like going back to the fact that it's like my doctors are like, yeah, you're kind of like highly functional. Depressive. It's like I can keep going, but I need to get rid of these stories in this state as quickly as I can, because it's painful. I don't like it. Right. And I don't think anybody does. And depression manifests in a lot of different ways for different folks. It's some sort of negative feeling. It's some sort of like maybe even belief that pops up when we are depressed that we're like, I just got to get this thing to shut down. Right. Because if not, like, I don't know, I'm going to live in despair for way too long. Obviously, again, depression being a very heavy subject, sometimes folks feel really bad and they harm themselves. They abuse drugs and alcohol. They gamble away their life savings. So much of mental health is just like, we just want to change how we feel, right?
Right.
It's like, even though something bad may have happened to us, if we could somehow feel better, even with that thing still being a fact in our lives, the entire process would be easier. I'm not saying that it would be gone or anything like that, but it's like, this is indicative of like the whole journey itself. Sometimes when we're depressed, we have these stories in our minds. And then it's like, as soon as we leave that state, that story disappears, it changes whatever it may be. And so it's like, if we're able to change that state, we're able to change those stories and obviously like prevent us from doing things, taking actions that really don't serve us, might even harm us. I could go on for days about it, and I'm sure that I've kind of rambled, but I don't know.
No, it's good. It's exactly what I'm asking. And you are high functioning, to your point, like some of the stuff where I feel like it really bogs other people down. It seems to me like you're an action man. Like, that as long as you keep putting one foot in front of the other, you're going to get to that other side of the feeling, the other side of productivity, of health, where I think a lot of people more so get stuck. And again, getting out of your head, which is why I loved your title, because we talk a lot about decision fatigue within our groups. And the whole concept of, we can say we're going to go put on our shoes and walk out the door and go for a walk. And by the time we're going to get to our shoes, we've already told ourselves we only have 5 or 10 minutes. Does it really matter? Blah, blah, blah. And then we're back on the couch type of thing. Like, breaking that cycle of getting out of your head, and I'm hearing out of you, it's just like muting it long enough to take action. Is that accurate at all?
Pretty accurate. Yep.
Okay. Do you talk about decision fatigue at all? Is that a word that you use?
I don't think I really do. I mean, analysis by paralysis is something that like I may have mentioned in a blog post or something like that. But one of the things that kind of, I don't know, is tangentially related is the idea that like when we are anxious, when we're going into our minds and we're trying to like, one thing that I have trouble with, and I think some of my readers do as well, is like, folks may say to us like, hey, you're going into some scenario in the future that's making you anxious, that's going to make you fearful, right? It's like, okay, you're about to go on a date with like some person that you find attractive, right? It's like, it's a scary thing. You're putting yourself out there. You don't know how you're going to be received. You may have had trauma in the past that has affected how you see and act in relationships. And that's a scary thing. And so folks may say to us, like, whether it's like personal development leaders, gurus, parents, coaches, whatever, there's some sort of ethos in our society where it's like, we say like, visualize the outcome in your mind. And I think that can be helpful for folks who are like actually good at visualization. But when it comes to like mental health and anxiety, that can be so destructive. It's like not even funny. And I'm kind of speaking from experience, even though I may use different pronouns or whatever, right? It's like, we may say to ourselves, I'm going on this date next week. I want it to go well. So I'm just going to see myself in that situation and it's going to be going well. And the next thing you know, it's like an hour later, you're on the couch, you're like cold sweats. You're totally freaking out because you're like, well, I'm trying to see myself in that situation, but now I'm nervous in that situation. And I'm trying to push through the mental nervousness and the physical nervousness that will eventually be there when I'm in that situation. But I can't see and I can't believe that what I want to happen is actually going to happen. And so even though it's not quite analysis by paralysis or like decision fatigue, it's almost like this, like we are spinning the wheels of our mind and we are getting less than nowhere. We're going in reverse, right? We're going so fast in forward that we're going reverse. And so one of the core premises of my book, of my brand, is when we say that we're like doing all that mental rehearsal, we are so far in our heads. And so every tactic that I throw at you is basically a way of saying like that pattern that you're engaging right now, that looping thinking, like break out of it as fast as you can. Mm-hmm. Some of those strategies are better than others. Again, this is why I provide a lot of different tools to folks. So that way they're like, oh, I like that one. I don't like that one as much, right? It's like one tool that I like a lot is like reciting a mantra. I follow Tony Robbins. I've been, a fan of his for a long time. One of the mantras that he uses is, if you get in your head, you're dead. And so like when it comes to, shifting our mindsets from saying, hey, I'm ruminating about this date that I'm going on next week, I'm spinning the wheels in my mind, I'm super nervous. Like that is such an intense experience that we need some other intense experience, almost one that's like perpendicular to it to get us out of that situation. Right. So like what I do is rather than say like, I'm on the couch and it's like, hey, if you get in your head, you're dead. If you get, what I mean? It's like, I'll try, sometimes I don't have the awareness to do it. I'm, the feelings overtake me or whatever it is. But when I can, I stand up and I scream it. And I'm like, if you get in your head, you're dead. If you get in your head, you're dead. If you get in your head, you're dead. And for those folks on the video feed, I am slamming my chest, right? And the reason I'm doing that, even though it's a little ridiculous, is I'm trying to say like, hey, brain, like, listen, like my body is doing something right now, right? Like it's trying to kind of move my attention from what's going on in my mind down to my physical body, get me back, into that parasympathetic nervous state. Trying to just shift my mindset as much as I can. So I don't know, another tangent, but I like that one.
Yeah, no, it reminds me, I used to work side by side with psychologists at a center. And anyways, one of the things that I heard her mention one time as a tool too was like jump in a really freezing cold shower. And it's kind of what you're doing. You're just like making this instant hardcore change so that you can flip the vibration, is what some people might call it. But the other thing that comes to mind with yours is that when you're saying, if you're trying to picture something that's too far away from what you can really envision, there's this gap. And when your gap's too big, that chasm's too big, then it's pie in the sky, where you and I align on all this, that everything's individual, the journey's individual for everyone. And that's why different tools are going to work well for everyone, as well as if we like shut the gap in little by little, right? Those little changes are what going to keep getting closer to where we're trying to go. And I love that we can see that from a mental health standpoint. We can see it from a fitness standpoint, from nutrition. Like, I think if our society could just get out of this microwave society and get into slow and steady, that we wouldn't have these crazy expectations that we're not getting to,
Absolutely. And that is probably a long conversation for another day. But yeah, obviously some of the things that we do in our society, they don't benefit our mental health, right? And I think being able to be aware of that, to make those realizations and say to ourselves, like, whatever those activities are that aren't benefiting me, I got to change them. I got to switch them up. I got to do something else. Again, a lot of different things we could cover there that we won't get into, but it's a great point. Yeah, maybe book 3.
You're not done with this book 2, or I've already got you writing another one.
I would not imagine I'm done at book 2.
I don't think so either. I think that this is on your heart and you're going to keep going, because every one that finishes a new topic is going to pop up that you're going to be like, yep. Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah. My website is getoutofyourhead.com. It's all one word. There's no dashes or spaces or anything. And then on Instagram, which is kind of the platform that I tend to be most active on, the handle right now is Get Out of Your Head Books. There are no spaces or dashes in that either. So I run that account. I say this on all my podcasts. It's like, if anybody wants to reach out to me, tell me their story, let me know what they're going through. If you've read the book and you enjoyed it, or something helped you, or you need clarification, whatever it is, reach out to me. Right. I want folks to know that, like, if you are listening, you are not alone in this battle, right? If you deal with anxiety, if you deal with depression, it may feel like you're alone in this battle. But if you look at the statistics, it's like 1 in 5 people deal with depression over the course of their lives. I think it's 17% of Americans fill a psychiatric drug every year. The statistics are wildly higher. Things on television would lead us to believe the stories that we hear within our inner circles, right? It's like, oh yeah, these people are all doing amazing, and these people are all doing amazing. It's like, people struggle, and I do too, and I'm sure listeners do too. If you want to reach out and talk about it, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to provide some guidance, some help. Again, just know you're not alone.
Thank you. You're wonderful. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks.